What are the most common misconceptions about witchcraft? And why would a teen witch become a Christ follower? These are just some of the questions we're going to explore today with our guest, Sarah Anne Sumpolec. Sarah, I've heard you interviewed a few times, and
Hmm.
your story gets dramatic, so to speak, when you move into what you describe as a haunted house at 13 years old. Now, we're going to come to that house and talk about it. But first off, I just appreciate you coming on the show, sharing your story. Maybe we could start by just talking about what your family was like growing up before that pivotal move when you were 13.
Well, thanks for having me, Sean. It's great to be here. So my family was, I always kind of described them as a religious. Like there
Hmm.
was some kind of, my dad didn't want anything to do with God. I knew that. Like
Mm.
my growing up, it's just kind of, we didn't talk a lot about it, but like he always thought church was ridiculous. And
Mm.
he really had communicated this idea that Christians were stupid, and that
Mm.
it was not. It was just dumb sheep followers and everything else. So that was kind of what I got from my dad. My mom was. I would describe her as agnostic. Like I think I mean, we went to a church every once in a while. Like it was just like this
Mm.
random things, but it was didn't never meant anything. Like it was never actually like I didn't understand what it meant. It was just something that we did because we weren't Jewish or we weren't some other religion. We just, so it was very like it was never real. And of course, my dad very much had this anti-Christian feel my whole life. So that's kind
Mm.
of where we were in a religious sense before we moved into the house. So.
As much as you're comfortable, do you know or are willing to share what your dad's backstory was? Did he come from a family that was that way? Did he just have an experience with Christians? Did he study a certain thing in college? What do you attribute to him being so anti-Christian and thinking it's just stupid?
Um, I think that's an interesting question. Actually, I haven't been asked that. So it's very interesting with my dad because my dad, very much communicated a lot of ideas of how he felt about things, but he
Mm.
was kind of cagey about explaining like really a lot of details. And
Mm.
so it was interesting that like long after I got saved, I actually had those conversations with my dad more pointedly, like just really like, well, dad, you say you believe in reincarnation. Why? What exactly do you believe? And then like you believed in, you said that witchcraft was real, that we had this line of witchcraft and all this other stuff. Well, what does that mean? What did and I really, really, really pushed, and he still was rather cagey about it. But I do know that he absolutely, he believed in reincarnation. He believed in the
Mm.
supernatural. He believed in powers. He believed that he had power, and
Wow.
that's what he communicated to me, that I had powers as well. And he, you know, I mean, think of it like somebody who maybe it's the wrong term to use the word psychic, but like
Okay.
he felt like he knew things about the
Mm.
world and about people, because of his this connection, this power. And so it wasn't like he you know you know did the whole, like, I didn't see him doing seances and stuff like that. It was more like this, like, I am powerful. Like he saw himself that he possessed this, and he engaged the world as if that was true in a lot of ways.
Mm.
So his the like I did the spells and stuff like that, but it was almost like he was beyond that, I guess is the best way to
Mm.
communicate, is the way he talked to me about it. He was just like, you already have this. This is something you possess. So
God, that's so interesting. Well, we're going to get into some of these spells, what they did, what they mean, of course, the
yeah,
story of why you left it. But you described moving into a house at 13 years old. So to paint the picture,
yeah,
you're 13 like any other 13-year-old girl, trying to find your place in the world, navigate relationships with parents, your school. There's so
yeah.
many life changes happening. Tell us what you mean when you describe this house. I've heard you use this term as a haunted house. What does that mean? And then we'll get into your actual move into the house.
It's so funny. So, Christians get really weird about this stuff. They just get so weird. And I swear, I tell my stories, and sometimes people like just kind of back away. They're like, ooh, I don't know what
Okay.
to do about you. So I'm very used to that. Like, but I think the biggest thing is that I think coming from the world that I came from, it was like, I don't think Christians often really understand just how real the supernatural world is,
Mm,
and they really want to dismiss it. They want to say, oh, haunted houses aren't real and everything else. And obviously I have some apologetic, things about like what I actually think was happening at the
mm,
time. My framework was only, this is ghosts, right? These are, we call them ghosts or spirits, or
mm.
those kinds of things. I mean, now as a Christian, I see the demonic,
Sure.
I see the demonic stuff and exactly what was happening to me and around me at that time. So the haunted house very much was, there were, it, it's like a presence. You know how we as Christians
Mm,
can we sense the presence of God. We
okay.
as super we are created triune, right? Body, soul, and
Hmm.
spirit. We have a spirit. Our spirits before we're saved are dead, right? And while I understand all of that, I do think that non-Christians can truly experience a presence or something shifting, something that they feel in
Okay.
in a space. And so that's the only thing I can think of to kind of compare it. Like it's like you could almost feel like there was something different, and truly there were noises, there were things that happened, there were doors that shut, things that moved that shouldn't have moved. There were things that it's almost like I don't know if you ever, the Matrix. So you know how the Matrix
Yeah.
kind of like, it's kind of this tilty thing. It's almost as if there was moments where you're looking into a space, and it's not that you see something really really specific, but it's like this jarring, like.
Hmm.
And at the time, like I do separate like how I look at it now,
Of course.
post and in 2020 vision, and what I experienced then. And when I experienced it then, it was like witches use the term thin place, like a
Oh,
place that, have you ever heard that term?
no, never.
Okay, so there's a term thin place, and it basically means where the veil between the supernatural world and the
Hmm.
natural world is thinner, and so that there's better access to spiritual powers and things like that.
Hmm.
And so for lack of a better term, it was kind of like a thin place where like there was this supernatural activity already there. And then personally, I think by taught by doing the witchcraft and doing those seances and inviting those spirits to participate with me, we invited, my dad and I, between us, invited this supernatural activity
Wow.
into this house, in this space. I don't i don't know that I believe anymore that. I don't know how I feel.
Hmm.
I'm one of those people that I'm like, you know what? There's so much we don't know. And so I'm very careful to be dogmatic about certain
Okay.
things. But like hauntings are a good example. Can spirits or demons be trapped in a place? Like in scripture, we see them
Hmm.
attached to people, right?
Yep.
Specifically people. We don't
Hmm.
really see them attached to a space. And so I don't know, looking back, I'm like, were these spirits attached to the house, or were they attached to my
Hmm.
dad? And then attached to me
Oh,
because of my dad. And that space stirred it up. And I think I could make arguments either way, kind of thing.
that's
All I
fair.
know is that it was very, very real. And I heard, saw, and experienced things in that house that were terrifying. Eventually I was absolutely tormented by these demons. So
Wow.
like I would see like, yeah, it was stuff that, like, I mean, they can implant, I mean, they can, you can see things that maybe aren't like physically there, but they're there. Does that make sense? So
It
like
does.
it was, and that space really stirred it up. So, and interesting, and I don't even know if you want to go here because I keep talking and,
It's okay. It's okay.
but, but, so I lived in that house when I was from about 13 to 18.
Okay.
So that was my time period that I was in this house. And of course, all this very dramatic stuff happened to me in this house. And I've been back to that town, and I've seen that house a couple times over the 20, however many years was after that, and everything. And so, but a few years ago, right after COVID hit, so it was, I guess, 2020, 2019 or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
We went back to the town, and my husband and I walked up to the house. I like walked up and knocked on the door, and I was like, hey, I used to live here when I was a kid, and I never got to say goodbye. Never kind of had this closure,
Mm.
because the house was foreclosed, and all of a sudden they were gone, and I never
Okay.
saw it again, kind of thing. And they let me go through the house. And it was the first time
Wow.
I've been in that house
Wow.
since that time. And like it was bizarre, because it was like, it was the first time I'd ever been in the house as a Christian, and knowing what I know. And now you asked me, you mentioned a question that you were saying, would I ever go back in a haunted house? So I did go back in this one.
Mm.
And I can, like, it was, there was so much to it. Like, not, it was, my own personal memories, my own personal
Sure.
things of doing that. And of course I lost my dad too. So like my
Mm.
dad is no longer with me. And so, so kind of like there was all of that, those natural memories of like
Sure.
being there and everything else. But I will tell you one thing, like they run this place, as a bed and breakfast at this point. And I don't think there's any way that I could ever sleep in that house. Like
I
walking
don't
through it
blame
was
you.
one, but I don't think I could do it, because
I
it's
hear
like
you.
I knew
Hmm.
I kn- again, I'm not sure I think that it's necessarily attached to a house. I think
Okay.
demons really are attached to people, personally. Now,
Sure.
could my mind be
That's
changed?
fair.
Absolutely. Not dogmatic, but still, like I think being there would stir up my own fears of what I experienced when I was there, because of how, like, just traumatic it
Yeah.
was.
That's
Anyway.
totally understandable. It just fascinates me. You would even go in the house and want to go back and have closure. But we're going to come to
They
some
don't
of
have
those
any power over me
changes.
anymore.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, there you go. We're going to come to
Yeah.
some of that transformation. Take
Yeah.
me back to when you're 13. Did your
Mhm.
dad say, hey, this house is haunted? Did that freak you out? Did that excite you? What was it like moving in?
Mhm.
Take us back to that moment.
So, my dad, absolutely. It was one of the things he was most excited about this house. He was like, "This house is haunted," and it's like part of the reason he bought it. Like he
Wow.
very much communicated to me that this is the coolest thing about this house, is that it's haunted. And my I like I was a daddy's girl, and
Mm.
my dad's approval was something that, like, you talk about 13 and that time period, and that is why I think teenagers in particular, like, I think the statistic is like 80% of people who begin in witchcraft, you start as teenagers. It's like
Huh.
because they do, it's that search for identity, that search for, having power and identity. It comes back to
Sure.
those two
Okay.
key things, which witchcraft offers young women specifically, in a way that they don't necessarily feel empowered in many other ways. So as a 13-year-old who looked up to my dad, and who really was kind of looking for that sense of a sense of identity, he didn't, that was the not only was that the moment that we, like, walked into this house, and that what he was most excited about, but it was like he had never talked about these things before. And so
Hmm.
I was like totally like, excuse me, what? Like, you what? Wait, this is a good thing. Okay. So this you chose this. Okay. And so it was like me catching up with, like, oh, and so by him talking about that, it like revealed this whole other side of my dad that I didn't
Mm.
know existed until that time. And then as a very early on, when I started asking more questions about, like, well, what is this? And we had this marble thing happen when I first moved in.
Okay.
It was very early on, and you could hear a marble rolling. Like,
Hmm.
I don't. To this day, I have no idea why the marble, why a marble. I don't
Hmm.
even know. But you could hear it. It was like rolling on the floor, but it didn't stop. Like, a marble should, like,
Huh.
kind of reach a
Yeah.
spot that it should stop. It's just like this weird marble sound. And my dad and I had this interaction where it was like, you heard that, didn't you? And I was like, yeah, I actually did. Like it was, and that was the moment where it became very, very real to me that like, oh,
Mm.
there is something going on in this house. And then when I asked more and more questions about it, and he was like, because again, it had not been something that I knew about my dad or that my dad had ever shared with me up until that time. And so when I started asking more questions, that's when he gave me the book on witchcraft. And so that's what
Mm.
started opening that door very wide.
So he actually gave you a book on witchcraft, and just what did he say? Did you start reading it? Pick up the story there, how that started to change your identity.
He basically gave it to me and was like, this is who you are, very much like
Wow.
very pointed, like this is who you are. You're old enough now to know who you are, and so start here, like this is where it is. And it was a very old book.
Mm.
You're talking like, it was about this thick. It was very
Wow.
old. The cover was falling off. It was, and yeah, I burned it later, so I don't actually really know the
Oh,
title. It
that's
all got
probably
burned.
good.
All of it
But
got burned.
did you kind of pick it up and read it with anticipation and eagerness, like a lot of other people might read scripture to find answers to big
Absolutely.
questions?
Absolutely. I mean, my
Mm.
dad was like, "No, this is who you are." And this is like, like I was, I was blown away. I was a kid, and I was like, "Oh, this is what I'm meant to do." And
Wow.
as my dad, he had a lot of, you know, power. Parents have so much,
For
like,
sure.
because ultimately, no matter what happens, I mean, we do that first thing in our built into us is that wanting that approval, that connection with our family, and it's the way God designed us. And so, yeah, no, I was blown away. And the book was old though, and it was very dense, and it was very difficult to get through. And it
Mm.
wasn't very long that he I discovered what a new age bookshop was, and was able
Okay.
to find more modern day, at the time, in the 80s, modern day versions of everything. So I was able to like, that's where the books, where it started with the book that he gave me. But like I was able to access tons and tons of like modern day books that were a little bit easier to kind of get through and understand. And then I was able to ask him questions about, like, and so he was adopted. So
Hmm.
his family line and everything else was a little unknown and everything. But I do know, and I hesitate to mention this because, like, people have so many opinions. But you know what? I don't even care. Maybe I'm just getting too old that I don't care what people think anymore. But there was a Masonic connection with my dad's side, but then
Mm.
also that he believed that he had this from, and that he had these powers from very, very early on.
Mm.
And so he would constantly connect it back, like, this is your destiny. And he used words like
Wow.
destiny, which my dad had never used before. So, like,
Wow.
the way he was talking about this world was so off framework for me, for what was typical for my dad and what I heard from him. And so that just made me believe it more, because I was
Mm.
like, there is something here that he has now shared with me, and only was sharing with me. Like, it was this kind of thing, because my mom thought we were all ridiculous, and that she just kind of didn't want to even, like, I don't even if yeah,
Mm.
no, she was just like, oh, it's all in your head, it's all your imagination, like.
That's
And
what she
was
thought.
like, oh, this
Mm.
is this is so she lived in that world. And my sister, I think I know she has, that she's like she's completely blocked out all memories of that house. Like, it's just not there. Like,
Interesting.
she has blocked that out completely. So it's very interesting how all of our reactions to the house were very, very different. And you can have experiences that other people right next to you don't, because of how you are connected in, I believe. So, did I answer the question? I don't
Yeah,
even know if I
you
answered the
no, no,
question
you
properly.
totally did. So your dad gives you this
Okay.
book, you start reading
Mhm.
it. When would you say, even if you didn't use these terms, I am a witch, and then you started practicing it? How old were you, and what did that look like where you really owned it?
I if I had to pin it down, I would probably say around 15, because like for the first couple of years, I was kind of like getting my footing, and we had moved yet again because we moved a ton. That was like move number 13 or something like that. I don't even know. It was insane. But I would say the I began gathering the books and exploring, because okay, so this is who I am as a person. I am nothing if I am not a learner, and
Mm,
I learn through books. I learn through reading. Like I am a voracious reader, and so I had already at that like by the time like early on, like very early on, I was a believer in the sense that I believed what my dad was saying was true. I believed him that what he was telling me was
sure.
true. It actually took me a season of time to kind of accept that and be like, could I? Could that be really, could that be me? Like, can I connect it with me? And so I read a ton during that time. And I would say by the time I was about 14 to 15,
Okay.
I was actually like set up the altar in my room and was casting spells
Wow.
and doing all of that kind of stuff. By then, and I had it set up in my room. It wasn't very obvious. It was kind of tucked into a corner. Also, I believe my room was extremely, there was, I don't even know, but my room was, yeah, you could, I
Mm,
felt like there was activity in my room and everything
okay.
else. And for a long time, I would say for a good season of time, for a year or two, I thought witchcraft was, it was it. That was it. I'd found destiny. I'd found purpose. I'd found identity. Like I would all. It was good for a long time, and then it
Mm.
wasn't. And then
Okay,
it
now
just.
hold on before we get to that part. When you say
Yeah.
cast spells, just
Mhm.
I'm a rookie. Like what did this mean? What was the purpose? Clearly you didn't think you were harming people. Presumably you thought these were good
Mhm.
spells. Like what
Oh.
kind of spells were they, and just tell me a little bit about that if you're comfortable.
Yeah. So I would say so. Witchcraft is very much a world where at the time they called them, called yourself a white witch. Actually,
Okay.
I've heard kids use that today even. So that's still like a white
Mm,
witch, meaning that it's not good. I mean, it's not bad. It's not, you're not cursing anybody. You're not doing that, because that's
got
actually
it.
considered really wrong within witchcraft. And I don't think people realize that. I mean, there's a
Hmm.
law, there's the threefold law, like anything that you put out, you will receive threefold.
Okay.
So ultimately that kind of governed, I would say that that's the one thing that stood out, because you can pick and choose whatever you want to do within witchcraft. Paganism is such a wide umbrella, and it still is like, I mean, there are more specific forms like Wicca, but like pretty much all witchcraft and everything else falls underneath this paganism umbrella. And
Okay.
then you decide where you want to be in that. And they um, so where was I think I lost my train of thought.
You were talking about the different kinds, the white
Oh,
witch and this.
white witchcraft. Okay, perfect. So yeah, so I definitely consider myself a white witch. I wouldn't hurt anybody. So essentially, most of the spells were about seeking. So a lot of it was divination, right? Where you're
Mm,
seeking wisdom, direction, or understanding about your world, or about people in
okay.
it, or things, or direction, things like that. So divination tends to be a big piece of it. Also, as I, you can, wisdom about, friendships, or things like that. Love spells are huge.
Oh.
Don't go on TikTok and
Hmm.
search love spells, because it's bad.
Wow.
But it's there's so like, about love and friendship, and making connections with people. At the time, I was the new kid in a town, newish. I was still new in a town where everybody had grown up with each other. So I was
Oh.
very much felt like an outsider in
Okay.
my world. But I wasn't like excluded. Like it wasn't.
Okay.
It was just, but it's like where, you don't fit in quite as much as everybody else.
Sure.
Like it's like I was on the periphery. So it wasn't like I was this loner, desperate to come in. I was like I was
Okay.
really very much like wanting to connect more with people. And so and then also power and understanding. It came, and then spells for for things that you wanted, like jobs, or tests, or
Hmm.
just the normal teenage things that you might run across in that world. And that's pretty much, I think, what you see a lot in witchcraft now is it, what, depending on the age and what they're looking for. But like, and there's also this appeasement of spirits. So I know that's a weird way to say it,
Okay.
but that's kind of what it is. It's sort of like when you sense that things are chaotic, you want to bring that chaos down. And so there's spells to kind of like control those, that activity around you, and bring it down. And I also was doing the whole like connecting with these spirits from what were in the house. And so trying to find out about them, because it was like a mystery solved to me. Like, I mean, and so that was a thing that I could use witchcraft to try to connect with these spirits to figure out what was going on. And it was like this, it was almost like, yeah, it was almost like exploring a mystery of like what's happening in the house and stuff as well. So I would say that those are kind of the main areas that the spells would have concentrated around at the time.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Now, when I hear somebody described as a witch, it doesn't seem to me that it's a complimentary term somebody would embrace. Maybe I'm reading it wrong, but would you have said, "I'm a witch and this is great," or were you a little bit more subtle about that because of the connotations?
I was definitely subtle, but at the same time, I never felt like I would have been looked down upon. I mean, I
Hmm.
would have thought people would be, it's weird, but it's not. It's still a major thing. Like, I mean,
Hmm.
Sean, this is one of those areas that I like. It is enormous. Like, it is enormous, the amount of people that, and not only that, Christians are using terminology that's witchcraft, like on a regular basis, and they don't even like recognize it. They don't even recognize that, like, I just wrote a whole article about this manifesting, like, the word manifesting is absolutely everywhere right now. And I don't know if you've seen it on social media, but it's all over social media. People talking about manifesting. I am manifesting this for my year, and I'm manifesting this job and everything else. And I'm like, it's witchcraft. I mean, that's what that is. It's just, they're just not using all the terms, and it's being done by people that wouldn't even consider themselves witches, but they're using the language of witchcraft within this idea that used to be just like, they used to call it like positive vibes, or like I'm thinking positively about this job or something like that. But like the witchcraft just continues to seep into our culture and into this thing, to the point that, like, I mean, I used to have to go into these little back alley new age bookshops to buy stuff on witchcraft. Now it's in my Barnes and Noble, like in a
Wow.
very open, inviting section. Like, everything you need to do this is like right there, everywhere. And so it is such a draw, because it offers so much that the church doesn't necessarily do a good job offering, which is really sad. And
Hmm.
coming from my perspective, like, I like, churches aren't comfortable talking about this stuff. Like, I find that, like, even though I have gotten out there and been able to share my story, like, I hear over and over and over and over and over these teenagers, like, nobody ever talks about this. Nobody told me that what I was doing was wrong. Nobody told me that the Ouija board that my
Hmm.
friend had out at their slumber party was dangerous, or that, like, oh, hey, maybe watching the tarot card reader on TikTok is really, really, really bad for you, because it can lead down dangerous paths. Like, nobody's talking about it, and yet
Hmm.
I definitely think that, like, I mean, I'm kind of grateful, but I don't think that, I think that term witch is extremely trendy and extremely
Wow.
good. It wasn't, and it, even though it was weirder when I was growing up, for sure, like, it's not like it is now. I was never embarrassed by it at all. No. Like,
Hmm.
I didn't dress like some goth and, wear
Sure.
all the black and stuff like that.
Sure.
Like, I looked like any other kid. I wore an
Okay.
amulet. I wore an amulet,
Okay.
but
Okay.
that was the most like exterior thing that I
Hmm.
did. But my friends in high school, several of them actively knew that I considered myself a witch, because, like, I
Wow.
talked about it. And I had a few I had a few people in one of my history classes. I think it might have been government. And there's a couple of Christian guys in there. And it was actually one of those beautiful, like, because when you look back, you can see God trying to get a hold of you along
Yeah,
the way,
yeah.
like kind of thing. And so these two guys in my government class, we would have arguments about spiritual things sometimes because they were Christians, and I was just like, oh yeah, no, this is, I know, this is what I am, and oh yeah, Jesus is fine, like, just because, again, there's actually a huge contingent that's like, oh, you can be a Christian and a witch, like you can have all of that. So like I had read that, yeah, if you want to worship Jesus as your God, you can do that, you can pick that one, but obviously it is so far removed from actual Christianity and who Jesus actually is, that it's like this false, it's a false version, and they recognized it, but I didn't. And so I was like, it's all the same thing, we're doing, and they're like, no, we're not doing the same thing. And but I didn't get it at the time, that blinders, we're deceived, and until that those blinders came down, I couldn't see it. But once I did get on the other side, I was like, oh, I get what they were arguing with me
Then
about
you
now.
see it looking back. Okay, so
Exactly.
let's go there. How old were you, and what were the first signs that made you start to question being a witch?
um so I saw my dad was very much he was the start of all of it. And so when I think it started to scare me when his life started to blow up, because he started using drugs when I was in high school. And at the time, I was young enough to know, like, recognize that something was wrong with my dad, and something was but then it became really, really, like, scary wrong. And I really was like, witchcraft was the way I handled things. And so I was definitely trying to cast spells to protect my dad and to rescue him, because I saw him going downhill. Like, he lost, I don't even know how much weight he lost, but he became super, super skinny, and like it was, and he had track marks up and down his arm. Like, it was really, really scary, especially as a young person. And I didn't have any relationship with my mom so I was felt very alone in the house with trying to help my dad. And I don't, I mean, I don't know. I know that that was the impetus for things kind of turning really scary, but like, I don't know. I don't fully understand why everything it did. It was like I was going down this path that I thought, this is great. This is wonderful. This is real. I had
Sure.
embraced it completely. I'd chosen this identity on my own very much. And then this stuff started happening with my dad. And it was like all the things that I was experiencing, it suddenly started getting scary. Like, I started getting these tormenting dreams. I started, like,
Mm,
seeing really scary things, like flashes of, like, really, like, I mean, for lack of a better word, demons, and everything
mm,
else. And it was just like, and I didn't understand why things had fully changed, like what had gone off skew. And as a choosing to be a witch, I was looking for, okay, what do I need to do? What do I need to change? What did I do wrong? Like, and it was this very much sense of, like, maybe I had done something wrong and I needed to fix something. Because, again, there's this idea of appeasing the gods and goddesses, or like,
yeah,
like, this, for lack of a better word, you sacrifice,
mm,
you do, to kind of ease the gods from being angry, or the goddesses, or whoever you have chosen to, worship, because
sure.
there is a structure of worship and gods and
Okay.
goddesses within witchcraft. So I was desperately trying to figure out, like, what happened, why did everything go off kilter. And of course, I believed my dad was like me and had all this power, but I saw him, like, disintegrate, and I was like,
Mm,
something's really wrong. Something's wrong. I just don't
mm,
know what. I do not know what's wrong. And it got very, very scary. And again, seeing things, the tormenting dreams and stuff like that. And I was doing the divination. What do I do to, like, fix whatever went off kilter here, and to help my dad and to protect my dad, because I saw what was happening to him. I was afraid he was going to die. Like, I mean,
wow.
I was really
Wow.
scared. And so I was like, I've got to help him. I'm the only one that can help him. Like, this is what I have to do. And it was one of the most probably clear moments, because with divination, obviously the witchcraft, there can be kind of like clues and things like that, and you kind of like
Okay.
cobble ideas together, right? So this was one of the most clear things that I remember. And I remember where I was sitting. I remember, and I don't know that it was actually auditory, but it was close enough that it felt that way. I'll say
Okay.
that.
Okay.
And that is, to have new life, you must die.
Hmm.
Now, think about the perversion of the truth in that, right? I didn't
Wow.
obviously recognize it then. I did not recognize it then.
Wow.
But that
Hmm.
is truth. What Satan did was twist it and turn it to you. And I knew when I heard that I was supposed to commit suicide. I knew
Holy
it.
cow.
I fully knew it. But again, like, look at the perversion. Like, I didn't recognize, it was like
Hmm.
one of the most mind-blowing things later when I became a Christian. I was like, oh my goodness, talk about angel in disguise. Like, I mean, like, he uses Satan often. I mean, often, I would say he almost always
Hmm.
perverts the truth. He takes a piece of the truth and then perverts
Mm-hmm.
it and changes
Mm-hmm.
it. And so then we are like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And he
Wow.
pulls us in this direction. And so, and I heard that so clearly. And I was like, I have to sacrifice my life to save my dad. And that's
Holy
what I felt
cow.
like what I needed to do. And
How
it was
old were you at this stage, if I can jump in?
I had my car, so I was over 16, probably between 16
Oh,
and 17.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So only 2 to 3 years into practicing this, you hit this point. Okay. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. That helps. Keep
No,
going.
yeah, you're fine. So that is, I mean, so we went from this, like, oh, this is, and it was never fun and games for me. It was very real, very honest. I went on the years ago. I went on the Tyra Banks show. They like
Hmm.
called me. It was back when they were doing, panels and stuff, and they had found out about my story, and they were doing an entire show on witches, on Satanism
Hmm.
and witchcraft and everything else. And they wanted to have me on as the rebuttal witness. Like, as a Christian, they were just like, oh, hey, you came out of this and everything else. And craziest thing to be involved with, but I'm really glad I did it. But one of the witches there, accused me. She was like, oh, Sarah was just a lost teenager. She wasn't really a witch. And I'm like, no, I was fully in. I was fully in. I mean, I had stacks and stacks of books because I told you I was a learner.
Yeah.
I voraciously pulled it all in, and I believed every word of it. But
Yeah.
so when that happened, when that voice, whatever it was, what was a demon? I don't know what it is.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, it was a demon. When that
Mm-hmm.
happened, I knew for sure that, oh, I have to do this in order for my dad to get well. And that these spirits
Huh.
would take care of my dad if I gave up my life. And so to contrast that with Jesus asking for our lives later and what that looks like versus what the witchcraft version was.
Mm.
So yeah, like I think, so yeah, I went and tried to kill myself. I didn't work. And I was
Wow.
actually devastated, because I felt like, I didn't, uh, I did. I remember feeling absolutely devastated. Oh, actually, no, I know exactly when this was 16, 17. Yeah, I was 17. I was 17
Okay.
because it was like right
Okay.
before I went away to college. Yeah, so it was the summer. It was like earlier,
Oh,
very
okay.
early in that year that I was going to go away to
Okay.
school. And that's why it was over that winter. That's right. So I was 17. I had turned
Okay.
17, and I remember being very, very devastated. And so ironically, because I tried to use carbon monoxide in my car,
Mm.
and I woke up, in a so, like, we didn't have a garage, so like, I had a car at the time that leaked carbon monoxide. It was an old car, and so you had to kind of roll the windows down a little bit to keep the airflow and everything else, because it was a
Oh,
vintage car back then. and
okay.
And so all I did, I stuffed up all the windows, so that, so that all the air would stay in there. And I drove. I was just like,
Man.
I drove, and we lived in a rural area, so like I was able to just drive, and and I did that, and I was like, okay, this is it. Like I know this will
Wow.
eventually do this, and it'll be painless. And so I was like, okay, I can handle this. I'm willing to do this for my dad, and I I woke up in a park on the ground,
Hmm.
and my car had kind of like hit a curb. It was up on the curb. I didn't crash it. It was a stick shift, so like it stalled, I guess. But it was kind of up on the curb. My door was wide open, and I was like several feet, like maybe 5 feet from my car, like
Hmm.
flat on the ground when I woke up. And I don't have any memory of like
No
stopping the
memory.
car, getting out of the car, of any,
Jeez.
like I don't have anything. And so I woke up, and it was like this really, really devastating, like, oh, I failed at doing this. Like my dad's now going to die because I couldn't do this. And so I remember feeling really, really devastated. And I got
Hmm.
home, super ironically, I got home that night, and I guess I was late. Like my parents didn't know nobody ever knew where I was. Like it was the
Hmm.
80s. Nobody kept track of anybody back then. Like it was awesome. but but I got home, and I remember my parents were mad at me, or they were like, where were you? Because I guess it was a time that I wasn't, they didn't, I don't, because I
Okay.
don't think I told them I even left. I think that that's what it was,
Hmm.
because they usually, like, I would have told them, but I didn't tell them where I'd gone. And I walked in the kitchen, and I guess from the carbon monoxide, I don't actually know, but like I guess my eyes were super, super bloodshot.
Hmm.
Like something was wrong with my eyes. Like I don't even remember looking in the mirror later to see what it was, but they saw my eyes, and they're like, what is wrong with you? And my dad was like, are you using drugs? Are you using drugs? And I literally was, I looked at him, and I was like, are we really going to have this conversation, Mr. Heroin addict?
Sure. Sure.
Like really, who's using drugs here? And I basically ignored them and went up to my room and everything else. And I didn't know what to do. I was mad. I was mad at myself. I was mad at the witchcraft, and I felt like everything was failing, and I didn't know what to do about it. Like I was just like, this didn't work, like I tried so many things along the way, and I'm just like, and I'm still, and this big one, like I had failed, and I was like, but I remember, and again, this had to have been a moment where God kind of just, kind of like shook me a little bit. Didn't recognize it as that, of course, but there was this little moment where I was like, maybe things will get better when I go away to college. Maybe it'll be okay. Like, like maybe getting out of
Okay.
this house, and what's going on in here, and then the chaos with my dad, and maybe stepping away, maybe because I was supposed to go away to college in August, right? So I wasn't
Yeah.
super, super far from that. And I was like, maybe instead of trying again, maybe I'll hang on and
Hmm.
see what happens, kind of thing here. And I can always kill myself there, like kind of thing. And that's literally how I was thinking. I know I sound so cavalier about it, but that is how I was thinking about the whole thing. I was just
Hmm.
like, oh, I can come back to this. And so, went ahead and graduated high school, and I had, I did try. There were a few like smaller attempts that summer before I went away to school, like
Okay.
just kind of like there were not, I don't know. I did stupid and dangerous things, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Where so I was
Sure.
suicidal in the sense that I was like, I didn't care about my life at that point.
Hmm.
I was done. I was done. And I was just
Wow.
like, everything's wrong. I don't know why. I did everything that I was supposed to do, and I don't understand. So I was very done. Did a lot of stupid, risky things that thankfully I did not result in any permanent issues. But I went away to school, and yeah. And so I moved into college, and I had two Christian roommates.
Ah, gotcha. Okay. Are you comfortable sharing where you went to college at this stage, or do you want that off the record?
Probably. I mean, I went to Mary Washington, which
Okay.
is in Virginia. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So you have two roommates who are Christians. I can
Yes.
guess the story, but tell us how this started to change and how long it took for you to become a believer.
So I moved in with them, and I'm pretty sure we all got put together because we were all interested in theater, and because
Okay,
we all kind of like, you check those little boxes. You're like, oh,
sure.
I am this and I'm this, and Anyway, we all like theater. That was pretty much the main connection between us, and they read their Bible, and I have to tell you, I know that that's the strangest thing, but that is what confused me the
Hmm.
most about them. Because I met other Christians. Like I had, there were Christians in my high school, and there was, I kind of knew about it. Like I didn't know much about it, but they read their Bibles like every day, and I was like, why are you doing that? Like, I've never like I was baffled by that. Like
Hmm.
it really made me think. And then the second thing that really kind of made me be like, there might be something here that I'm missing. Um, because I very much had this idea of, I had bought into this whole world so completely. And then everything fell apart. And I was
Hmm.
like, it was like, I really did feel like truly that I was missing something within that world of witchcraft. Okay. So there was a sense of like, something's not right. I don't know what it is, but I've got to try to fix it. And so I was fixing it within that world. So when I moved to college and I saw them, that was the first time I started to think, not only might something be wrong, but I wonder if I'm looking at this wrong. Like I just
Oh.
wonder. It was enough that I was like, huh,
Hmm.
because they had peace. And I would not have described
There
it
you
like
go.
that at the time. I would not, I just recognized something that they had that I didn't. And I know later on, I realized that was peace. Did
Hmm.
not have peace in my life at all. And so they had this peace, and they read the word, and it was super, super weird. And I was still suicidal at this time, like
Wow.
fully like willing, just we'll see what happens. But like I was still feeling very suicidal on a regular basis. And they were involved in InterVarsity. I thought that was a sports club because I was like, I don't play sports. I'm a theater kid. Like okay, like I just never even made the connection. They would say that they were going to InterVarsity, and I'm like, okay, bye. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what it was. Like I just thought it was sports because varsity, right? Like it made sense. And so they'd invite me, and I'm like, I don't want to go. What? No, I'm going to go to a party.
That's
And so
funny.
I would do that. I would just go. But they kept inviting me. They kept inviting me, and it was close to um, sometime deep in October. So like we moved in August, September, October. So it had been several months, I guess. And somewhere deep in October, I my called home, and the phone was disconnected. And I was like, that's weird. And of course, this is pre cell
Right.
phone,
Right.
everything else. There's
Right.
mail. But I call home, phone's disconnected. And I'm like, well, that's weird. Okay, so try back the next day. Disconnected. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay. So it goes on for a week, and I'm like, where's my family? What's going on? And it was about a week where I was just like, oh my gosh, what is happening? Like, why can't I reach my family? And of course, I'm at school, so like I can't just go find out. So
Sure.
I'm just kind of like in this baffling kind of like really, really like starting to get super, super concerned, but also, I don't have anybody a confidant or anybody to talk to about it. So I was just kind of getting more and more scared. And then my mom calls, and it's just, and this was getting close to Thanksgiving, within a few weeks anyway. And she's like, so she calls, and I'm like, what the heck? Like what, like where have you been? Like what in the world is going on? And she's like, oh, well, here's your new address. She doesn't tell me anything. First of all, she
Wow.
doesn't say. She's like, oh yeah. So here's your new address. This is where you're gonna come home for Thanksgiving. And I'm like, are you any other information? No other information, nothing. Just like they moved out. I eventually
Hmm.
found out that, there's a foreclosure and everything else, but that was not
Gotcha.
communicated to me.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
and so I'd had this happen, and I was just like, it just threw me for a loop. And I was just like, this is the only home that I've known for, I mean, you have to think that I grew up moving 13 times,
It's
12 or
incredible.
13 times by the time I hit eighth. So this was like 5 years in one spot. So this was home to me. This was the
Sure.
only home I really like ever like say this is mine. And now it was all gone, and I wasn't even gonna go home. I don't even know where I was going because like I had to use an actual map to find my new house because that's what we did back then.
That's right.
and
That's right.
um, and and I was just in this really kind of very vulnerable spot of like I don't know what to do or think about this. And they invited me to university, which they just kept inviting me, even though I turned them down constantly. I like constantly turned them down. They kept inviting me, and I have to tell
Yeah.
you, be persistent with those crazy people because like
That's
I was
great.
that crazy person, and you just never know when they might just be like, fine,
Hmm.
fine. God finally
Hmm.
gets them to that point where they're like, okay, fine, I'll go to your silly sports club thing. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I went to university with them that night, and of course, whew, that was not what I was expecting. Did not know what I was doing. Kind of sat there, was kind of just respectful. Didn't know what I thought about it. And of course, remember, you have to think my dad hated this stuff. He thought it was
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
ridiculous and stupid. So I definitely had this like this idea from my past. And the pastor gets up there, and this sermon or this talk was now it was a sermon, but it was from a local pastor because that they university does that. They invite in like
Yeah.
local people and anything else to share. And it's been over 30 years and I still remember the whole sermon
Wow.
because it
Hmm.
was one of those moments. And it's that matrix moment where it's like everything. So it was like I had seen the world tilted, and I didn't realize that I was seeing the world tilted until I saw the truth. And what that sermon did, he talked about the two of the altars in the Bible. He talked about the Isaac altar,
Okay.
and then he talked about the prophets of Baal when Elijah called on
Hmm.
fire else and was consumed. And so he was sharing about how when we place something on the altar, so as young people, when we place something and give something to God, when we give something to God and say, oh, God, I want to be married, and so like I'm going to put this on the altar, there's two different things that can happen, and that is it can be consumed. That thing is not for you, and
Hmm.
that is an idol that needs to go away because that does happen sometimes. So that consumption of that thing versus gaining it back purified. Okay. And I mean, it is, I remember this sermon because as a
Wow.
witch, I understood altars and sacrifice and like
Amazing.
all these things. And it was like, but they were coming at it from like this other complete different angle. And I was like, I think I've been wrong all these years.
Wow.
Because if this is
What a
true,
thought.
then everything that I've been thinking has been wrong. And it just was like this huge like revelation, and it just hit me, and I was just like, oh my goodness. I if I was so blown away. So I went out, didn't talk to anybody about this, of course, because like I don't even have words to describe
Sure.
necessarily the way I was feeling.
Hmm.
But the pastor like very clearly communicated like that like God loves us and wants us, all of us, like our whole selves, and he talked about the idea of a living sacrifice, which again I'd been told to kill myself by demons, and so like what
Wow.
a living sacrifice
Gosh.
was. And so it was so like, so I was like, wait a minute, like kind of thing. And so I didn't go back to my room with the roommates, and I went and found there was this little spot in between buildings that was like a little anyway, there's a little spot.
Sure.
And um and I kind of like stumbled out of that thing, kind of just really feeling like stunned, because it was like seeing for the first time. And I knelt down, and I did not have the words, but I was just like, I think I'm supposed to do this. I don't know.
Hmm.
I feel like somewhere in my head, you're supposed to kneel. And so my moment was, and I remember what I said, because I didn't know the four spiritual laws. I didn't know the things to walk through, right? I didn't know any of those things. And so I knelt down and I was like, I literally was like, if you're real and what he said was true, that
Wow.
you want me and that you actually love me, because there is no love in witchcraft. You have
Mm,
to remember, witchcraft,
mm,
it's not about love. There is no
mm.
love. It is about identity, power, and all sorts of other things.
Wow.
There's no love. It is devoid of love. But he
Mm.
talked about that God loved me and wanted me. And I was like, if what he said is true and that's real and you really do want me, then I'll be yours. I'll be yours.
Wow.
And again, no language to talk about what that was because I didn't even recognize that as getting saved at the time
Sure.
because like
Sure.
I didn't have language. Went back, never said anything to my roommates immediately. But it was within a few days, I would say within the next week or so, I made a comment to them in passing. Like, I don't even think it wasn't like a sit down thing either. It was just like, I said it, but I said, I said, yeah, I really want to learn more about Christianity, like about what it is. And they erupted. I was like, whoa, what is wrong with you? Like, whoa, whoa, why are you freaking out? Like, I was just, but they were so excited. They were so like, and I'm just like,
Sure. Sure.
oh, you guys are weird. Like, just, you know, but again, like that was the first time I was like, oh, something might have actually
Mm.
might have actually happened. And so being a reader, being a learner, that was what I did was like, so I did go home for Thanksgiving, like right
Okay.
after, near that time when I got saved. And so it was my very first time. I did get a Bible while I was home. I do remember getting a Bible. And because it wasn't a house that I knew, and didn't say anything to my family, and actually didn't tell them for quite some time. Because that was a very, very messy moment that happened.
Sure. Sure.
My dad basically wanted to disown me. Like
Mm.
it was really bad. Like
Sorry.
he told me later. Actually, both of them were furious with me. And I mean, my mom looked at me and was just like, I liked you better before. And I was like, I was
Wow.
suicidal and I hated myself before. I'm like, what? Like this.
Man.
And then my dad was like, yeah, I wanted to cut you off completely because you betrayed. I did the ultimate betrayal to my dad. I betrayed him, betrayed everything that he believed in, everything that he had taught me, everything. And so I really, like when I say I lost my family, I really did. I just,
Mm.
it was just gone. And so
Wow.
I ended up kind of having to stay down at college. I ended up like just not going home anymore for the summers, and God brought me a spiritual mom who discipled me,
Oh,
which
wow.
saved my life. Which in a lot of
Wow.
ways saved my life because I think without that like deep discipleship and really kind of getting the healing and the wholeness that I needed from all that I'd done to myself, like God brought that as well into my life during college, and so all of that happened during college.
So it sounds like when you sort of have a time frame in this year, senior year, basically suicidal,
Mhm.
lost hope through college, get to college within the first 3 months by November, you're a believer,
Yep.
life turned upside down, cost you your family. What was it like through college for a while? Were there just continued struggles with identity? Did you feel the lure back to witchcraft ever, or was that behind you in the rearview mirror? What were those struggles like after becoming a believer, that process?
Okay. So there was never any lure for witchcraft.
Mm,
I got it was like a plumb line for me. Like
mm,
it was like that plumb line went straight down. And man, like it was a little bit longer, because remember I moved to college, so like I came to
mm-hmm.
college with that identity of being a witch, but I didn't have all my stuff with me. Like I was like at my house, like kind of thing. It wasn't all there at college because I didn't need it at that point either. Like
Sure.
obviously I knew enough that I didn't need the actual physical books to come with me.
Mm,
And I remember walking down campus, and and when that because that revelation of like what I had actually been doing, like it was very early on. I was like, oh my gosh. And so I pulled all of those witchcraft books and like went home and found them one break or one weekend, pulled them all because I wanted all of them to burn. Like I was just like, I don't want these anywhere where it can destroy
wow.
anybody else's life. And so I had a very, very strong plumb line of what was real and what was not real,
Mm,
because I lived the unreal. And then I was deeply like searching out the scriptures and reading the scriptures and doing this stuff. And So a couple things happened. So witchcraft was behind me completely, and I didn't really even talk about that as like a testimony. I didn't even know what that was back then. Like it's just, I was a Christian now, and I was going to be a Christian, and I wanted to learn everything I could about God. But I also found that I got myself into a little bit of trouble with other believers because, like, I'd be like, well, the scriptures say this. Why are you doing this? Like you say you're a Christian and you say you believe all this, but then you're doing this. And so I point things out to people and they get so mad at me.
I
I
get
got in
it.
so
I
much
get it.
trouble. People get so mad at me. But to me, it wasn't out of like arrogant. It was just sort of like, but you but you're saying that you're following this. Like I genuinely don't get why you're not following this. Like
Hmm.
explain this to me. Because to me, I saw very early on that disconnect between
Mm-hmm.
people who actually believe it and actually follow Christ and all that he does, and people that just did it because that's what they're used to. And nowadays I call it like lightly churched. There's lightly churched people that are just, they have enough church in them to know what to say, what to do, feel comfortable in that environment, but they're not actually living it and walking it. And so I started to recognize that difference in what was going on. Again, God brought a spiritual mom to me through InterVarsity too. Love InterVarsity.
It's great.
Through InterVarsity, she came and spoke. She met some people from our InterVarsity group, and we had started doing this thing called Power Hour, which was like a worship hour and everything else. And so she had come, and so she kind of took in us ragtag group of college kids and was just like, "Hey, let's actually learn the scriptures. Let's learn what this really is," kind of thing. And was very much discipled within that home group. So I kind of like started off in a home church, and it really did rescue me because I was a
Wow.
disaster. I was a
Wow.
disaster inside. Like I needed so much
Hmm.
healing. I needed so much thing. So I would say that was a process through all of college,
Hmm.
and then even after college, as a young, like right after college. So got discipled and everything else. I will say though, one of the things that kept dogging me during those years is that spirit of suicide, because
Wow.
I believe suicide is absolutely a demon, and it
Hmm.
absolutely can attach itself to people. And again, the you can get into levels of demonization, and like whether you're talking about something that's attached versus possessed and all that other you that's a whole other conversation. But those thoughts did continue to dog me for quite some
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
And eventually I did get free, and I was delivered of a demon during
Wow.
my home group.
Wow.
And that again, like it's see, Christians get so weird when I say, I'm just going to talk about it. Whatever.
Do it.
Whatever. Demonization is a real thing, and
Hmm.
people need to be delivered on a regular basis. Like it happens.
Agreed.
It does happen. Jesus did it a ton in his ministry. Why Christians don't want to talk about it, I don't know. They like talking about Jesus's healings. They like talking about Jesus, doing the miracles. But gee, when it gets to, oh, Jesus delivered people from demons on a regular basis, they're like, oh, we're not gonna touch that. Anyway, it's a whole thing. But during this time in the home group, I remember I had a my spiritual mom. She was like, hey, she kept asking me about my relationship with my mom, and I'm like, I don't really have one, like it's no big deal, whatever. I was always thinking that my issues were with my relationship with my dad, right? And they were. I had some there too. But she's like, I think you're upset. And so she was like, she shoved a piece of paper in front of me, and she's like, just write down everything that makes you angry
Hmm.
about your mom. And I was like, fine, I'll do it. 20 something, I'm just like, whatever, kind of thing. And I start to write, and something demon rises up and
Oh
starts to
my.
choke me. Like I had marks on my neck. I had marks on my neck.
Oh my
Like it
goodness.
started to choke me. And I had this moment. And so my spiritual mom, of course she knew exactly what to do. She got rid of that thing. And then I was able to repent and walk through, and that, just utterly, forgive my mom and let go of that and everything else.
Hmm.
But unforgiveness can cause demons to
Wow.
stick, kind of thing. And
Hmm.
so once I kind of, but that took, I mean, it took a season of time to even get to that point to be ready to do that too. Like we have to remember, like our growth process in Jesus is can be long and nuanced, and it
Yeah.
takes time to like get through the things. Like thankfully, God doesn't come in and like swoop in and like knock down our whole house and like, okay, we gotta fix this whole thing. He just does it step by step in a beautifully unique way with each one of us. And so it just had
Mm.
got to that point that it was time for that thing to go. But I do think we, you don't necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have to be that dramatic either. I feel like,
Sure.
people do get delivered with just hearing the truth. The truth sets us free, right? Sets us free from what? See, we have to remember we are bound in some way. We're bound by lies. And so being set free can happen in so many different ways. I did have that one dramatic, like, thing that happened for sure, but I was set free in so many ways, and repented in so many ways, like, kind of thing. And so yeah, I definitely, that spirit of suicide, it took a while, but like finally, it finally left me. But that one was a trickier one.
Mm.
Those thoughts would still keep coming, and that temptation of like, you don't belong here, you don't, like those words from that past, like
Wow.
they can be very, very difficult. And so I would say that was my
Mm.
biggest fight, because it was a fight. Like, I mean, I
Sure.
never tried again or anything like that. It was just like, it just felt like it was dogging me, for a number of years. So
Well, it makes sense. That teaching was embedded with you from your dad through the house for years. It makes
yeah,
sense that it would take time to rid you
yeah,
of that. I've got so many more questions for you, but I gotta respect our time. Sarah,
I
I
know.
really, really appreciate your vulnerability, your transparency on this, your willingness to talk about this. I can imagine there's lots of feelings as you revisit some of these stories back in your mind that it raises, but I know folks on my channel will be encouraged and blessed and challenged by your story. If
Good.
people want to follow you, you
Mhm.
mentioned a blog earlier. What's your ongoing ministry where people could track with what you're doing?
I do have a website, and so I do have a website. There's a few more interviews on there. I've been writing a series of articles for Focus on the Family about this too. It's the
Great.
first time in a while that people have been willing to talk about it, because again, like,
Good.
I have like, I have a movie written, I have a memoir written, I have a nonfiction book written, but nobody's interested in talking
Hmm.
about it at all. So it's been weird. It's been a little weird, but so I do have a website, SarahAnneSumpolec.com, and then Focus has a few more. They've got I think there's two out now, and there's a few more coming.
Coming.
Yeah,
So it's SarahAnneSumpolec.com is where they can find you.
pretty much. Yeah.
Perf- Perfect. Well, again, really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. We will do it again in due time. For those of you watching, make sure you hit subscribe. We've got some other interviews and apologetics content coming up, including actually another former witch has agreed to come on and talk with me, probably a couple months down the road. But as you know, on this channel, we try to mix in a lot of stories of people and also direct apologetic content. So make sure you hit subscribe. Also, if you thought about studying apologetics, this topic is one of the topics we cover in our program in the area of theology. We have the top rated apologetics distance program. If you've ever thought about studying apologetics with me, I'd love to have you in my resurrection class, Why God Allowed His Evil class on biblical sexuality. Information is below. Think about joining us. It really can be a game changer. Sarah Ann, thanks so much for your time and sharing your story. This is a real highlight for me.
All right. Have a great day.